Welcome to New Angle Perspectives. This channel focuses on global affairs, politics, economics, and history, looking beyond headlines to understand the deeper forces shaping events around the world. In today's episode, we're looking at Venezuela not through slogans or breaking news, but through one specific policy decision that played a central role in the country's economic collapse and the events that followed. So today we're launching a deep dive into Venezuela, specifically looking at it as, well, the ultimate case study in the perils of being a petrostate.
Right, but we're going beyond just the high-level view.
Exactly. We're drilling down into the core mechanism, this long-term, politically driven interaction between the state oil company, PDVSA, and the country's whole financial system.
And our mission really is to unpack how political decisions just completely dictated economic reality. We're looking at the political management of oil revenues.
Sounds a bit dry, but it's everything.
It's the absolute crux of it. We're talking about the specific regulations, the provisions the government used to control that oil income, and that's what we need to understand.
And the main instrument, the thread that ties this all together.
It's the official exchange rate policy. That and the need to monetize PDVSA's debt that came from it. It's the one thing that explains, 2 decades of turbulence, linking a currency decision directly to hyperinflation.
Okay, let's set the stage. Why is oil so central here? I mean, we know Venezuela has oil, but the scale is.
It's massive. They hold the world's largest proven oil reserves. And that means oil makes up something like 80 to 95% of all their export income.
Which gives the state oil company, PDVSA, enormous power.
So much power that it couldn't just stay a normal oil company. After 2003, especially, our sources show it really morphed into what they call a parastate.
A parastate. Okay, so it's doing a lot more than just pumping oil.
Oh, much more. PDVSA started taking on functions of the state itself. It used its foreign currency reserves to directly fund social programs. We're talking health, education, housing, all of it.
Bypassing the normal government budget process.
Completely. It was the country's economic engine and its social safety net all rolled into one giant organization.
Which sounds great if you're a politician who wants direct control over everything. But obviously it became a nightmare. We hear about Dutch disease all the time with resource economies, but this was something else.
It was far, far worse. Let's call it the Venezuelan disease. The real problem wasn't just that the currency got strong. The problem was a political decision to maintain an exchange rate that was completely fictional.
An officially overvalued bolivar.
Massively overvalued. For years, the government just refused to devalue it.
So, in simple terms, they made the U.S. dollar artificially cheap for people inside Venezuela. Why? Why would you do that when your entire economy runs on selling dollars?
That is the central paradox. A cheap dollar meant the government was subsidizing the whole economy. Imports for consumers were affordable, social programs had massive spending power. But, and this is the critical point, they did it at the expense of PDVSA.
Right. They were sacrificing the long-term health of their only real asset.
For short-term political gain, it's like forcing your prize cow to sell milk for a penny a gallon while expecting it to stay healthy.
The cow is going to starve.
Exactly. The cow eventually collapses. And we can see that happen if we look at the first phase, from about 2003 to 2012.
The boom years. On the surface, things looked incredible. GDP growth was huge.
It was, sometimes 6 to 10% a year, and the government used that artificially strong bolivar to subsidize everything. Cheap dollars meant cheap imports flooded in.
But inside PDVSA, the bleeding must have started immediately.
It was horrific. See, PDVSA's revenue was all in dollars, but its costs, wages, maintenance, all those social programs were in bolivars.
And there was domestic inflation.
Right, so its costs in bolivars were going up and up. But the official exchange rate gave them ridiculously few bolivars for every dollar they earned. They were being financially strangled by their own government's policy.
Do we have numbers on that? How bad did it get for the company's finances?
The numbers are they're staggering. PDVSA had to start borrowing massively just to stay afloat. Its total liabilities went from around $60 billion in 2008 to over $140 billion by 2012.
Wait, it more than doubled its debt.
Doubled its debt during a period of very high oil prices.
That's money that should have gone into reinvestment. into pipelines, refineries.
Exactly. It's the definition of decapitalization. And at the same time, another warning sign was flashing. Non-oil exports just flatlined. They stagnated completely.
Which just made the country even more dependent on oil.
It intensified that rentier character, and all this pressure created the first big, undeniable crack in the system, the parallel market for dollars.
The black market.
Yes. The government just couldn't supply enough of those cheap official dollars, so an illicit market popped up where the bolivar traded for what it was actually worth less than half the official price.
And that unofficial price started to dictate what people actually expected prices to be.
It became the real price.
Yeah.
A huge, flashing red light that the official policy was a dangerous fiction.
So that brings us to the next phase, from 2013 to 2017. This is where the fiction meets reality and everything just accelerates.
It's a catastrophic collapse. PDVSA's oil production starts falling way faster than in other OPEC countries, and the national economy just nosedives. Between 2013 and 2017, GDP falls by 37%.
37%. And imports.
Imports plummeted 75%. The foundation of that subsidized economy was just gone.
And inflation, which was already a problem, just went vertical.
Totally vertical. It was around 20% in 2012. By the end of 2016, it was over 700% annually.
At this point, any rational government would have to devalue, right, to stop squeezing the oil company.
You would think.
Yeah.
But the political cost was seen as too high. Devaluation would have meant admitting the subsidy was gone, and living standards would plummet overnight.
So the decision was inertia. Maintain the fiction.
Even if it destroys the real economy. So, if PDVSA is collapsing and out of money, what was the government's solution? The solution was to turn on the printing press. The central bank, the DCV, started financing PDVSA's deficit directly, just creating money to pay its bills.
And this is the aha moment. This is what makes the Venezuelan case so unique. You called it a parafiscal deficit. Can you bring that down for us? Why is that distinction so important?
It's absolutely crucial. Normally, you see major inflation when the government itself has a huge fiscal deficit. It's spending way more than it gets from taxes.
And the central bank prints money to cover the government's goals.
Correct. But here, the debt didn't come from the government treasury. It came from the state-owned company, PDVSA, the parastate.
I see. So the hyperinflation was this toxic combination of two policies. First, the dollar subsidy that was slowly killing the oil company.
And second, the desperate decision to have the central bank print money to cover the company's resulting losses. They turned a corporate deficit into a national monetary catastrophe.
The scale of that money printing?
Yeah.
Can we even quantify it?
The numbers are almost beyond comprehension. The BCV's credits PDVSA, it went from being about 100% of the entire national money supply in 2014.
So they'd already doubled the money supply just for PDVSA.
Already doubled it. Then it grew to 200, 400%. By 2019, at its peak, that credit was over 4,000% of the monetary base.
4,000%. To put that in perspective for you, the listener, that's like if the Federal Reserve printed 4 times every single U.S. dollar in existence just to bail out one company.
Absolute chaos. That's the engine that drove inflation to its peak of 2 million%.
The system was completely broken. And then came the external shocks, like U.S. sanctions in 2017, which cut off access to international financing.
They ran out of road. There was no more external money. The policy had to shift, and shift abruptly. They went from squeezing PDVSA to desperately trying to save it.
A total reversal. So what happened to the exchange rate policy that caused all this damage?
Starting in 2018, the central bank finally surrendered to reality. They just started devaluing, frequently, adjusting the official rate to close the gap with the parallel market.
They made the official rate real. What were the consequences of that?
Well, for PDVSA, on a micro level, it was a lifeline. Suddenly, they were getting far more bolivars for their oil dollars. It slowed down the need for the central bank to keep printing money.
So it choked off the engine of hyperinflation.
It dramatically reduced the fuel for it, yes. But for the rest of the country, the macro picture, it was brutal.
Because the great subsidy was officially over.
It was over. Prices adjusted violently, daily, to the real value of the dollar. It was a massive, painful shock to the system. Now, inflation was still incredibly high, but it fell from millions of percent to, say, 10 or 20,000%.
Still unimaginable, but no longer accelerating exponentially.
Exactly. An incomplete recovery, bought at an immense cost to the population.
Which brings us to the paradox of Venezuela today. We see some small signs of recovery, oil prices are higher, and yet PDVSA is still just a shadow of its former self.
That's the long-term damage. Even with these recent changes, the company is only operating at about 25% of its 2000s levels. Its viability is still in serious doubt.
Because all those years of no reinvestment, that damage is permanent, isn't it?
It's decapitalization in action. You have pipelines and refineries that have literally rusted away. You have a massive brain drain of skilled engineers who left the country. You can't just flip a switch and bring all that back. It takes decades and billions of dollars.
So the final synthesis here. The ultimate failure was a conscious policy choice.
It was. The conscious cheapening of the dollar to fund political projects, done at the expense of the one thing that made it all possible. It was an extreme form of rentierism that ended up eating itself.
A truly powerful lesson. And you, the listener, should think about the fallout from that. All that infrastructure is old and needs massive reinvestment, which is just so hard to find given the political instability, not to mention global concerns about heavy oil and climate change. And maybe the starkest consequence of all is the recent news from January 2026 of former leader Nicolás Maduro being held in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York, a very real, physical end to a story that began with a single, catastrophic economic policy. That's all for this episode. We'll continue breaking down global events by focusing on policy, context, and long-term consequences, not just headlines. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more from New Angle Perspectives.